Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Magnus Nordenman, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I guess we should get this out of the way. You are doing this podcast as an individual, as an author, but not as an employee of your current company. Should we mention your company's name? I guess we don't.
No, I'm happy to currently work for Lockheed Martin, a great company, but always better safe than sorry to sort of foot stomp that. I am not representing my company here. I'm representing myself as a private citizen and as an author.
We should also mention that you and I connected through John Watts. So how do you know John?
So John and I bumped into each other in the DC think tank community, the Atlantic Council, where I was the director for the Transatlantic Security Initiative, doing a lot of the Nato work, and John Watts was one of our senior fellows, and he and I hit it off really well, and we worked together quite a bit, and then we did a lot of shooting the breeze in the office, talking about strategy and history and Australia and Sweden and the United States and so on, and after that we have remained friends.
John is a lovely person. I'll tell you, I started this podcast a couple years ago, and I always ask folks, hey, anybody else would be good for the podcast? He loves helping me with the podcast just because he's such a nice, decent, lovely guy.
No, he's good people for sure.
Yeah, and I do have to mention, and I don't know if John enjoys hearing me say this, but he was actually in my Army National Guard unit. I was a battalion commander, and he was a captain at the time in 2003. I guess in Australia's equivalent to the reserves. And we had him actually documented as part of our unit. And I made sure he went around with me all the time. And I said, I'd like you to meet my Australian captain, John Watts. Fantastic.
Yeah, so you had your personal Australian liaison. No, but I mean, it's that's certainly even when you're not around, certainly John refers to that experience as something that he enjoys, and that's definitely a reference point for him that he likes to talk about. So I've heard some of those stories and the things that were done to make it happen.
Adam Frost had a lot to do with that. A lot. Very cool. So you grew up in Sweden. Tell me what it was like growing up in Sweden.
Yeah, so I did grow up in Sweden. So I came over here when I was 18. So sort of from zero to 18. Interesting. So we're talking sort of 80s and 90s, which is interesting, which is probably this sort of especially sort of tranquil and comfortable period for Sweden, and then certainly sort of in terms of my my own family life, also sort of incredibly stable, and then actually sort of when I left, things started changing in a sense of sort of, Sweden opened up. When it's funny, my kids don't believe me for a second. And certainly Sweden was and is a democracy. But when I was growing up, there were two TV channels, PBS equivalent, Channel 1 and a PBS equivalent Channel 2. And that was it. There was cable was extremely rare and sort of exotic, and only a couple of people had it. If you wanted to sort of watch, Hollywood movies, you had to go down to the video store and get yourself a cassette. That was not what was on TV. Things like that. So in that sense, a very sort of more of a sheltered country, but again, obviously, don't misunderstand me. There was clearly freedom of speech, and you could get these things. The government was your parent, and your parent was sort of looking out for you, making sure you didn't watch too much Hollywood violence, kind of a thing. So a very sort of benign, stable childhood with not too much Hollywood violence, in it. But then actually, it's interesting sort of when I left sort of Sweden again, TV got liberalized, and you had all, there were more commercial channels, and so now, if you go to Sweden, sort of the media availability, for example, is exactly the same it is over here, right? So it was this almost sort of unique period in Sweden's history, sort of 80s, 90s, which was before sort of globalization, the fall of the wall, European integration, and and so on. So yeah, no, so on the one hand, fond memories, but like my kids don't buy it. This is like, what do you mean only 2 TV channels? What do you mean? It's actually there's a funny story. So at that time, there was only Disney 1 hour. There was only 1 hour of Disney cartoons every year, and it was on Christmas Eve.
It was almost
and
like a gift from the government to the
yeah. And it was almost like sort of like like football on Thanksgiving. You have to watch it, right? So like so like the entire country sat down on Christmas Eve at 3 p.m. to watch Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse, and it was the same clips every year, but it didn't matter because it's Donald Duck and Mickey Mouse, and otherwise if you wanted Donald and Mickey, you had to go to the video store and go go rent yourself like a VHS tape or something like that. But that was so it became this national thing watching Donald Duck on Christmas Eve.
Wow. So when you were I guess you guys had a kindergarten through 12th grade sort of notion there. Were you a dedicated student more than anything else? Were you more of an explorer of the world outside of school? How did you think of yourself growing up?
Wow, that's a good question. So, I was in study results, I was probably average, but I did like to sort of challenge the teachers and sort of do my own studying on the side and then sort of go back and call them on it. Right. Whether that was in, history or social studies or what have you, sort of, hey, I read this other book and it says, X, Y, and Z, and that's not what you taught me, kind of a thing. But again, in terms of my grade, it's not reflected in my grades. Grade wise, I was a very average student, but I did frustrate a number of teachers by sort of, I read this other book and that's different from what you taught me last week, kind of a thing.
Was it intellectual curiosity? Was it challenging authority? Was it a mix of those two notions plus other things?
I think sort of challenging conventional wisdom. I wouldn't call it challenging authority. It's interesting. I'm actually, as an individual, I'm actually, or as a person, I'm actually pretty risk averse. And to be risk averse and challenge authority, that's not a great, combo because there's lots of risk with challenging authority. But sort of intellectually, I enjoy sort of challenging conventional wisdom, and I enjoyed the sort of Minority Report and so on. And later in high school, I actually went to high school in a university town, 60,000 people, and it was very much dominated by the university. So even though I was not a university student, but the sort of the university very much sort of colored the sort of the city culture and so on. So it was sort of an intellectual town. So I was actually sort of a high school hang around for one of the sort of university debating societies, and their motto was, your opinion doesn't matter, your argument does. And they would bring in all these crazy speakers that would argue crazy things, but it was all sort of more, can they build a coherent argument around whatever it is that you're arguing for. So I think I was sort of colored. Yeah, again, I wasn't a university student there, but I think I was sort of colored by the university vibe, if you will, in high school. So that was something that I very much enjoyed.
Yeah, debate is. There are not a ton of people at the high school age that are attracted to it, but the ones that are very, very interested in becoming better at debating and arguing.
Right. And again, because it was a university town, right? And again, it's sort of, so, people reading books and they were quoting authors and you sort of hear about it. So you go read that book too. And, there was some university student and he seemed smart. And he had read this book, so I'm going to go to a library and find that book too, and so it sort of rubbed off on me.
So I took Latin in school, and I know the name Magnus means great. I have this impression that 50% of baby boys, are named Magnus in Sweden. Is that accurate?
Perhaps a little bit of an overstatement, yeah, but it's not an uncommon name. But what would be the? Yeah, it isn't quite a Michael, but it's certainly not sort of eyebrow raising. There's quite a few Magnuses running around in in Sweden.
All right. So you came to this country when you were 18. What was the situation that brought you here?
Well, actually, so two things. So I had traveled back and forth quite a bit before because I was also active in youth politics in Sweden. I was a member of sort of the youth arm, if you will, of Sweden's second largest party. And in Sweden and in Europe, sort of parties tend to be far more sort of organized than it is here in the US, where the parties are almost sort of more like tent-like big structures, and people go in, and you sort of almost you run under the name of a party, but that's sort of your affiliation. But in Sweden and in Europe, obviously, there are parties and there are members, and the parties organize the campaigns, and the parties figure out who needs to be nominated. And they also tend to come with sort of youth organizations, high school and sort of university students. And that's a way, it's a great way to get election workers to run around with flyers. And part also obviously becomes a recruiting base for when the party needs candidates for, local city council or parliament, and what have you. So as part of that, I'd actually participated in political exchanges, and I'd come to the US a couple of times to sort of observe political campaigns in the US and elections in the US. So I'd been over here a couple of times already. Obviously, was fascinated by this country on a lot of different levels, so socially, culturally, economically, politically, and a lot of those exchanges took place in Virginia, so Northern Virginia, Richmond, and so on. So I was generally familiar, and one time when I was over here, I was looking for a postcard to send home to some friends that I was sort of flipping through in some store that had the sort of. And I tried to find something with a local connection, and I found a postcard that had a bunch of sort of images of Virginia, of which one was an image of the Virginia Military Institute, and that seemed neat and sort of and exotic. And I looked at, and obviously, I found that's a college, that's a military college, which was something that I was interested in, and so I came to the U.S. to attend the Virginia Military Institute, based on a postcard image.
So wait a minute. So you saw the image, and then I imagine you did some research on what VMI was all about.
Yeah.
And your dad, and I read this from the forward in your book. Your dad was in the Swedish Navy, and you certainly had interest in joining the military as well. But you had a hearing challenge in one of your ears, which precluded you from joining the military. So if you knew you couldn't join the military, why VMI?
So you're right. So I'm from a military family, and I sort of grew up around the Navy. Although my dad as a personality is not especially military, at least on the sort of in the traditional sense of what you would imagine a sort of career military person to be. But again, I certainly sort of grew up around that. I actually spent a lot of sort of school between semesters. My dad would actually, and I would actually go live with him on base. So we actually lived a couple of hours away from base, and then my dad would sort of commute in for the week and then come home on so he would sort of geo batch, if you will. And when I, between semesters, he would just, bring me, and I would actually hang out with him on base for a week, and sort of live in the BOQ, or live aboard ship, with him. So not only sort of, being in a military family, but actually, like I said, sort of spending time around the military, as a kid. But I still sort of, but then for medical reasons, couldn't pursue a military career. But still had an interest in sort of in doing something different, right? If you're going to go to, if you're going to travel this far to go to college, you might as well do something different. I had a university 15 minutes from my house. If I'm going to travel across the Atlantic, I might as well do something different, rather than go to the place that, was 15 minutes down the way. So I think it was sort of the uniqueness of it. And then also I think, another one, let's not kid ourselves. I think sort of, guys in, 18, 19, want to prove yourself, can you do it? Kind of a thing. So that's how I ended up at VMI.
So once you had done all of your research, but you had not yet started, you had not gone to campus to become a rat officially, what was your impression of VMI before it all started?
I mean, that's a good question. I guess I had, well, I mean, and this is, I think, is true for a lot of military institutions. That certainly, again, and people sometimes tend to forget that sort of a lot of pictures from the obstacle course, a lot of pictures of people marching in formation, but at the end of the day, it's a school, it's a college, and you actually spend most of your time most of your time in the classroom, right? But that's something that strikes me, to go slightly off topic. That's what I find hilarious in sort of Hollywood movies about the military, and they show a military installation and like everyone is running in formation. And it's always like, I've actually never been to a military where I've ever seen anyone run in formation. Right? You know what I'm talking about though, right? Every movie Absolutely. There's or the fact that like people are running around armed. I've also, beyond the sort of gate guards, I've never seen people armed in a military installation. I mean, exercises about sort of in barracks, so to speak. You don't see people running around armed. But going back to VMI. Yes, I mean, so yes, I think I probably had sort of almost but to some degree that's because that was the image they wanted to show. Was almost this sort of basic training / boot camp, right? Because those are the dramatic pictures, and that's what people are attracted to when pictures of you sitting in a classroom. They're just not that exciting. Even though that's what you do most of the time.
Yeah, when you're a rat, there is some time that I imagine you spend outside the classroom going through various fun activities, and I mentioned outside because the weather in Virginia in August is very different than I imagine that any weather you had ever experienced back in Sweden.
Yeah, for sure. No, and it's interesting. It's actually one of those, right? We have, and I think everyone has had this experience that like there are certain smells, right, that just sort of brings you back or reminds you of something. And it's interesting, whatever, it's a smell that you may have had in your, what your house smelled like, or a piece of food, or, whatever. But my thing that always sort of makes me sort of sit up is actually the smell of wet grass. Is sort of the thing that sort of like, it's this smell that just stands out to me. And that's obviously from Lexington, Virginia in sort of August, with the sort of steamy heat, and you go out for morning PT at like 5 a.m. And then you spend an hour rolling in the grass doing push-ups. And so, and the smell of wet grass. And it's still this smell that just sort of makes me sit up. And again, I smelled it last week in my backyard, and it's just sort of makes you, makes you stand straight up. And so that's, it still sticks to me sort of, what is it now? 24 years later. The smell of wet grass. It's one of those things.
Makes you think of VMI push-ups.
Yeah.
So tell me your memories, both fond and not so fond, of being a rat at VMI.
I mean, it's, and this is probably sort of, standard that obviously, the fond, you make some great friends, right? And they're sort of, and you're with them 24/7. And, some of those guys are still my friends. And I said, and they were in my wedding and I was in their wedding. And in fact, for one of my friends, I was actually a pallbearer when his dad passed away. Right. So it's that kind of, that kind of connection. But on other, it's interesting. VMI is not hard in the sense of sort of that it's so physically strenuous that you can't do it anymore or what have you. It's the grind. It's the fact that it just keeps going. Right. I mean, it's sort of you start as a rat in like August, and they sort of wrap that up by like March the next year. So I mean, so it's a long period. So in that sense, it's not that they're making you run 15 miles without food. It's not that they're making you do, physical training. That's just sort of unovercomable if you are, I would say, sort of averagely fit. That's not the issue. The issue is that it just keeps going and sort of never ends. I mean, it doesn't, but it doesn't feel like it at the time. And then I think also, I mean, it's sort of more broadly, I think, VMI is, And don't get me wrong. I mean, like, I'm obviously a fan of the school, and I still go down and visit sometimes. And I'm a believer in sort of the concept of that kind of education. But I would say, so on on VMI's best day, the school teaches service and selflessness, and I think an important lesson is sort of, you're supposed to do the right thing, even though there isn't a reward at the end of the day, because that's not the point. The point is to do the right thing. And it teaches what I would call, healthy patriotism and citizenship. So that's on a good day. On a bad day, it can be a very sort of insular and defensive kind of school, which isn't so pretty. And I say that, also with an understand that, no institution is perfect, right? Every institution has good days and bad days. But yeah, on a good day, it's a pretty special place that I think are, still teaching sort of key lessons that I think are important for the country. But it can also be if it's in that mood, it can also sort of be defensive and insular and a little snarly, if you will.
Yeah, VMI's had an interesting ride the last 20 years or so, but we don't need to get into the details there. So back to your good day notion, especially this notion of honor and integrity. If you find a penny or a nickel or a quarter on the ground, what do you do?
Nothing. You leave it there. No, and it's actually, again, it's interesting, sort of, the different perspectives. Because I mean, I will say, when you were there and sort of in it, it was almost sort of scary, right? Because sort of, even though you haven't done anything wrong, what if something gets misunderstood and then you get rolled? And that was a big deal. And truly, you literally could leave your wallet out and no one would touch it. Or you could leave your computer in the library and go for dinner and come back and nobody would have touched it. But I see that, the incredible freedom that came out of that. So, for example, we would test taking time. We would literally come to the classroom for sort of finals, and the professor would go to your room and take it if you want to, because he would trust us that sort of you're not going to crack your book open, you're not going to get your roommate to help you with the final. That's an immense amount of freedom, right? I mean, that's sort of most college students don't get, right? I mean, sort of. How many schools can you go to where the professor goes, you go take your test whenever and wherever, and come out. Same thing if you had a test coming up and you hadn't studied and you went to the professor and said, "Hey, sir, ma'am, I've been sick the last 2 days and I've been in an infirmary and I just didn't have an opportunity to do this, or I've been on guard duty or whatever." The professor, got it. You can take it tomorrow. Because the professor knew that I was telling the truth rather than, you're making this up and you were probably out drinking or didn't feel like studying, right? So in that sense, sort of in hindsight, that was a remarkable measure of freedom that we were given, because they could, if I said that I was sick for the last 2 days, that was the truth. And then I would get another day.
Yeah, integrity begets trust, trust begets freedom sort of notion, sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah. No, so it's sort of incredible, not because now, on the outside is sort of this, if you miss the test, you're done and you're not going anywhere, and they have monitors in the classrooms to make sure that you're not cheating. And, that was never an issue. And I mean, there were certainly, if there was a meeting that I missed with someone and that person was upset with me and said, what were you doing? I told them what I was doing, and if that was legitimate, it would be okay, got it, because they knew it was, I wasn't lying, right? And that, that's obviously something that you can, get a lot of. So in what appears to be a very constrained and controlled environment, you actually had immense amounts of freedom, and I would say also sort of academically. I went to grad school at the University of Kentucky, which I very much enjoyed too, and I thought I got a good education. But in terms of let's call it intellectual freedom and sort of having arguments clash in the classroom, again, we might all be wearing uniforms and we might all have high-end tights and so on. But in terms of sort of allowing ideas to clash, I think, I found VMI to be freer than the University of Kentucky, actually.
Wow, that's pretty neat. So I know quite a few folks that have graduated from VMI, and once you break out of the rat line, it's funny how some personalities love. They end up showing their sadistic side to the incoming rats.
Right.
Some are, I would imagine, somewhat disinterested in rats, and then there are others that feel the need to protect the rats in some cases.
Right.
I think the name is Rat Daddy for the ones that protect the rats.
Mm-hmm.
Which one of those three were you, or is there a fourth category I'm missing?
Yeah, I was probably somewhere between sort of category 2 and category 3. Not engaged, or between not engaged and Rat Daddy, if you will. So yeah, so somewhere between those two. And again too, I think in VMI too, I had I relished opportunities to sort of challenge conventional wisdom, if you will. So I always say, hey, why do we do it that way? And is this really the best way? And there too, I like to sort of poke at the system, and again, less to challenge authority. I mean, it's so again this sort of challenge authority. I had very few demerits, and I didn't walk a penalty tour until my senior year. So that should tell you that I'm not into challenging authority. But I do like to sort of poke at things and ask questions, and why do you do it that way, and on and on and on.
How many demerits do you need for a penalty tour?
So it's less about that and more about sort of the severity of what you did. But suffice to say that it's relative. I mean, not that it's unheard of. Most people walk penalty tours way before their senior year, and I managed to not walk any until my senior year. So that tells you something about that. I tend to be relatively on the straight and narrow with authority.
do some folks make it through without any penalty tours?
It's rare. Supposedly George C. Marshall did, for example. Supposedly, and I think you hear stories once or it's doable, but it's rare, and that's probably you're probably more lucky than good at that stage.
I won't ask you why you had a penalty tour your senior year or two. What was your major at VMI?
International Studies.
Okay. Were there a lot of folks in that major in your class?
No. So at the time, International Studies was actually a very small major. I think there was like 40 of us. But it was I was actually down there about a month ago, and now there's like 300 of them. It's a major that has grown quite a bit. And it was an interesting time to do it. So 9/11 happened when I was a second classman, so that's junior. So then obviously things sort of started happening in the world, if you will, after that. So that was an interesting time to be there, with all of that sort of occurring around you, if you will.
Yeah, a lot of America, I imagine a lot of the world started to look outside of their countries. And I know I certainly felt like I did, and I started becoming a lot more educated around what was happening outside of our borders, which I think is generally a very good thing for citizens and countries to do.
Yep.
Having that be the spark, though, not the greatest spark. I wouldn't wish that spark on any country.
No, indeed.
Yeah. So, all right, international studies, and then did you go to Kentucky right away, or did you get into the workforce?
So I took a little bit of a break. I had an idea that what I really wanted to do was humanitarian work. So I actually went to Canada and started working at the Canadian Peacekeeping Center in Nova Scotia, where I discovered I did not want to do humanitarian work. And instead, then so I sort of piped back, and then it's like one way to get to the next stage is obviously to do graduate school, and then I came back and went to university after my 6-month foray into humanitarian work.
Can I ask what it was about that kind of work that was not appealing to you?
Sure. No, and again, don't get me wrong. I mean, the work that the humanitarian community, that God bless them. That is that's important. What they do around the world. It was I was actually more. The community was not what I thought it was going to be, and I found actually it was far more what I thought. At least what I saw of it. And again, my experience was limited, but nevertheless, surprisingly insular community. In the sense that it seemed to be a lot of they went to all these countries, but they seemed to be mostly talking to other humanitarians. Again, if you sort of look at the passports, right, there were people from all over, from Europe and Africa and the Caribbean and Latin America and Asia, and they'd all gone to all these impressive schools and so on. But if you sat them down, they basically sort of believed the same thing. So it was a rather sort of insular community, and I guess I was expecting a far more sort of cognitively diverse community in the sense of sort of opinions and so on. But I actually found the worldview was actually relatively narrow, and sort of if you talk to one of them, you probably actually, odds are you sort of have a pretty good idea of what the community was thinking more broadly, and that sort of just intellectually was not. I wasn't down with that.
It doesn't sound appealing, and it almost ironically sounds like collectively that community, and I don't want to color the entire community, but it sounds
right.
like one of the themes could be for part of that community that they're not super empathetic.
So I think they are, and they tend to be very much sort of they're on a mission, and certainly they don't get paid very much, and I think another thing to respect them for is they do dangerous work, and again, and certainly in the sort of post 9/11 period, it got to be increasingly dangerous work. In fact, two of the people that I worked with up there actually were later killed in Afghanistan by the Taliban. So in that sense, sort of there's no lack of idealism and no lack of bravery, because they go out and do what they do, and they don't carry weapons, and they don't have escorts, and they don't come with ballistic vests and so on. So in that sense, sort of no lack of individual bravery and idealism in that sense. But sort of intellectually, I found it rather narrow, if you will.
All right, let's talk about the University of Kentucky and what you learned there, and then we're going to talk about your book for most of the rest of
sure.
our time.
So came to apparently I only do education in places called Lexington, since I went from
I did not make that connection.
Yeah. Since I went from Lexington, Virginia to Lexington, Kentucky for graduate school. It's interesting, and again, like I certainly enjoyed it, and I thought it was a good education. But they had this accelerated program, so you actually do your master's in 18 months, which means in some ways I don't have much memory of Lexington, Kentucky. I sort of went in and did my, did the study, and again, enjoyed it very much. Had great professors. It was a, great program. But in terms of sort of getting to know the region or getting to know the city and so on, I must admit that my memory is actually rather, my memory is a bit of a blur. And same thing, sort of. I've noticed that a lot of folks that go to University of Kentucky are they're sort of gung ho about it. And again, I like the school. I thought I thought it was time well spent. But I didn't really have time to sort of, let's call it, sort of socially connect. So it's one of those sort of, when I meet other people who went to Kentucky and they're all excited, and I'm sort of like, yeah, no, it was good. But again, that says more about me than it does about University of Kentucky. I certainly came away very pleased with it, but it was this sort of whirlwind 18 months.
And what was the program? What were you studying?
So they have a school called the Patterson School for Diplomacy and International Commerce, and then they have a couple of sub concentrations. So I did national security. So a lot of sort of military science, operations analysis, grand strategy, and so on. And then they had a diplomatic track, and they had a trade track, and so on. But I went full in on national security and did a lot of sort of defense and military affairs kind of stuff.
What was it about defense that was appealing to you? Or security in general?
Yeah, well, so part of it has to do with 9/11. Even though we're a couple of years removed at this point. So part of it was 9/11. That's defense and national security is actually important, and really bad things can happen if we don't care about it. But another part of defense, and I still actually haven't. No one has to this day. No one has challenged me on this. I challenge you to find another domain where you get to sort of consider so many different sort of aspects, right? If you're going to do defense, you are, in one way or another, you are dealing with technology, economics, history, psychology, and probably another couple of topics, right? And I can't come up with another domain that sort of allows you, and you may, whatever role you're in, you may be dealing more, with technology side, or you may be dealing more with the strategy side, with the psychology side, right? Deterrence is nothing more than psychology at the end of the day. But I can't come up with another domain where you are allowed to range over such a broad spectrum of factors. And again, I make this statement quite a bit, and no one has proven me wrong yet, or sort of mention a domain where you get to do so many different things all at once.
No, that's a fascinating way to think about it. It gives you not only diversity, but each one of the things is so rich, and certainly opportunities to improve along all those divisions or all those notions for the sake of security. Yeah, it's a great way to think about it. I certainly don't have a challenge that pops into my head, but I will give it some thought.
Good.
All right, so you wrote a book, and I read it right away. I will tell you, it was a book that I read pretty quickly because I stayed with it. I enjoyed reading it. Like you, I grew up in a Cold War world. My dad was not in the Swedish Navy, but he was in the American Army. And so when I saw the title, I immediately became fascinated. The title is The New Battle for the Atlantic. And then your subtitle for the book is Emerging Naval Competition with Russia in the Far North. And you published in 2019. And so we need to think about it in that context. Pre-pandemic, certainly, pre-Russia significantly engaging Ukraine in what I would call kinetic fighting, or really trying to take over what appears to be the eastern third of Ukraine. What inspired you to write the book, or what was super interesting about the topic for you?
Yeah, no. So it was interesting to me because no one else seemed to be talking about it. Right. So after Kentucky, and I moved to Washington, and I started sort of, dabbling in the broader defense community. And then I ended up at the Atlantic Council, which is obviously, one of the big DC think tanks, specifically focused on the transatlantic relationship and NATO and the US's role in Europe and so on. When I joined, again, it was sort of the era of counterinsurgency. So it was all about Afghanistan and NATO's role in Afghanistan and so on. And then a little counter piracy, around the Horn of Somalia. And so those were kind of the stuff that I was working on, and the sort of juices that I was stewing in with, visitors coming in, delegations from Europe and going to NATO and so on. But then, of course, things changed in 2014 with the, Russian, takeover of Crimea. And then it's sort of, back to sort of competition with Russia. And it sort of stood out to me that sort of a lot of those, very understandably so, because we're talking Eastern Europe, right? So that's a land domain. So it's very understandable. But I think it also betrays a little bit that was sort of where NATO had been for the last 20 years, was the ground domain. right, in Afghanistan and Iraq, and certainly there were Navy and Air Force operations, but they're very much supporting land operations. So I think that sort of betrayed a lot sort of where everyone's head was at, and obviously the trick anywhere, I think, in order to sort of be noticed or to say something interesting is you don't want to be the guy or gal who says me too. Right, and there was a lot of people writing and talking about NATO in the ground domain in the Baltics or Poland and so on, and all very important, and so on. But to me, it's just like no one's talking about the maritime domain, and what's there. So I found a little bit of a niche there that no one else was in at the time. And then frankly, there was a little bit of a personal, I grew up in a Navy family, right? So I guess I had a little bit of a naval instinct, if you will, as well. And then the last but not least, and it's one of the things that I've, enjoyed the most about my work is that I've had a couple of incredible, for some reason, at some point, the Navy and the Marine Corps took a liking to me. And what I did, and they started inviting me out to sort of observe, sort of embed in exercises and stuff like that. So I've had over the years, I've had these incredible opportunities to go out with the Navy and the Marine Corps, and embed and sort of observe exercises. And so I've been on carriers underway, I've been on amphibs underway, I've been on frigates underway. I've flown in Ospreys, I've flown in Super Stallions, I've done catapult shots off of carriers, and so at some point the Navy and the Marine Corps took a liking to me. So I sort of maintained a naval connection, and at some point it was just like, what, there's a missing piece here that no one is talking about, and so I decided to write this book.
Yeah, I imagine Russia in economically good times would love to have a powerful Navy. But I guess what's your assessment when you wrote the book of the Russian Navy versus maybe what your assessment is today of the Russian Navy, without getting into the gory details and things we shouldn't talk about?
Yeah. No. So I think I think that the Russians are not stupid. I think they are resource informed. And as you said, there's no denying that the Russian Navy of today is not the Soviet Navy. But if you look at sort of what they have developed, it is not the sort of let's do the Soviet thing one more time, except with a smaller fleet. It is very much one that is cruise missile focused, and staying relatively close to home. But if you're with the ranges of modern cruise missiles, you actually don't have to leave very far from home. And you can actually reach most of Western Europe and Northern Europe and so on. So, one of the key points on my book is to sort of, hey, if you think that if there's a war between Russia and NATO, the Russian fleet will come out and meet the American convoys and sink them all, forget it. That's not gonna happen. What's gonna happen is that the Russian Navy is gonna stay pretty close to home. But from there, they can hit ports, they can hit airports, they can hit command and control nodes. And, if you do, American reinforcements into Europe become a whole lot harder. If you can't fly things in, if you can't ship them in, if you can't do command and control of forces, then you're sort of in then you're in a pickle. So that's long for saying I think the Russian Navy has an extended A2AD role. If you hear a lot about Russian air defenses and so on. But I think what the Russians have in mind is for the Navy to play an extended anti-access area denial role. And what we've seen so far in Ukraine, it's interesting. I think we need to be mighty careful about the conclusions we're drawing at this stage. It seems actually, from my vantage point, it actually seems that, well, first I think we need to establish that the Russian war plan for Ukraine is not the Russian war plan for NATO, right? That that's very, very different. And I've been struck by that. Actually, the Russians are actually holding back a lot of capabilities. I'm speculating here, but I think a reasonable speculation why they're holding back some of these, high-end air and so precision guided munitions is because they're still concerned about escalation with the U.S. and NATO, and they're looking to hold some of that back in case this escalates, and they actually need to fight the U.S. and NATO. I think another thing that we need to be mindful of is I think we are all the prime audience for a Ukrainian information operation, which is, obviously very much, David is beating Goliath and we should all get in on it. Having said that, I don't blame them. I think it's a brilliant info op. If I were them, I would do the same thing. And that doesn't mean that I don't think we should support them. I think we should support Ukraine. But in terms of sort of conducting analysis based on that info op is probably risky. So I don't blame them. I get why they're doing it. I would do the same. Whoever is doing social media for the Ukrainian government, deserves a medal. But it doesn't mean that it's a good basis to do military analysis off of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I have some decently educated guesses about what Russia, and I don't want to say in game. I'll just say what is their short to moderate term objective with this action in Ukraine?
Right. Well, I was thinking. So I think that there was a. So I think. Well. So I think there was an initial end. I think they had an end game in mind when it started, which was far more expensive, right? And I think that was to topple the government and basically get a establish another sort of Belarus that responded to Moscow. What I think they're looking for now is far more modest, right? Which is to hold for the long-term terrain in eastern Ukraine. So I think that's the end game. So obviously this is massive Russian miscalculation, but I would say on the other hand, and again I actually make this point in the book, that if you go back historically, this actually isn't all that unusual, or sort of this kind of sort of like major miscalculation as a basis for a war, because right on paper it makes no sense, but again, if you look at it historically, this actually happens with some frequency, right? I mean, think Argentina thinking that the BRICS won't mind if they take the Falkland Islands, right? Saddam Hussein thinking no one will mind if he takes Kuwait. The Japanese thinking they might have, it's a long shot, but they may be able to scare off the United States if they sort of impose shock and awe in Pearl Harbor, and the list goes on. So I think in that sense, I know there's almost become this sort of consensus around that Putin is crazy and this is idiotic and so on. But I would actually point to that. Actually, this is it's tragic, obviously. But this time, this sort of strategic miscalculation is actually not that uncommon historically. And again, I make this point in the book, and I certainly don't predict the Ukraine war, or anything like that. But I do sort of respond to the critics that say that, hey, a Russia-NATO war, that's insane. Just look on paper. NATO is so much more militarily powerful and Russia is weak, and how could this ever happen? And I sort of make the case that yes, on paper that's correct, but historically countries miscalculate, based on misunderstanding signals or not getting a signal at all, or what have you. So in that sense, I find the Russian behavior is again, I'm obviously not sympathetic, but I am more understanding of it, or sort of, I can imagine how they got there, because I know how other countries have gotten there historically.
No, that's a great set of examples you gave there, and yeah, you're absolutely right. Most wars have started over gross miscalculations from one entity or multiple entities. I don't think Putin's crazy. I obviously don't know the man. My guess is he's very prideful, and that extends to pride for his country, and he would love to expand the country's reach and their influence in what feels like smallish ways to me as an American. But I don't know what it's like to sit at the Kremlin thinking about these sorts of things. But I can't imagine Putin is bold enough to actually do something similar to a NATO country, like Poland, as an example. I can't imagine him going into Poland with a war mindset.
Right. And again, like I said, on paper, that makes perfect sense, but again, I think, I'm speculating here, but I think you can imagine I think, not today, but you can imagine I think one can imagine a scenario sometime in the future. Maybe the U.S. is off working a different crisis somewhere else, in the Pacific or what have you. Europe appears weak and divided, and so on and so. That a future Russian government is sort of, it's high risk, but if we do it, we have broken NATO, and this could work. And in fact, again, I think, I don't know the man. I'm not in Moscow, but again, I think you can, if you are Putin in Moscow in, say, early January, and you sort of look at the world and you go, and sort of, if you work your way around, so the U.S., just had this, terrible exit from Afghanistan, which was absolute circus. And the only thing the U.S. talks about is that it wants to get to China, and it doesn't want to deal with Russia because all they want to do is get to China. So maybe they don't care about Europe anymore. Angela Merkel is gone, and they have this new untried chancellor in Germany. Emmanuel Macron is going into an election, so he's consumed by that. And Boris Johnson, he's trying to deliver Brexit, so he's consumed with that. And whatever I do, they really seem to want that, oil and gas that I'm providing, and they seem really hesitant to do anything that would endanger that. And last but not least, the last 4 times I've used military force, I won. Right? So you can, I think you can sort of build a believable story how you get to, this could work, and it's a little risky, but this could work, and the strategic benefits that would accumulate to me, are immense.
Yeah, and I think with taking that risk comes the possibility that nuclear weapons are involved, and whether they're tactical nukes or strategic nuclear weapons, that's horribly scary for everybody on Earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just an American fear; it's a fear of all mankind.
Right. And I think there's and again, you've seen this historically too. That there is I think there is an element of self-deterrence, right? That we are concerned about these things, and certainly, there's been a lot of talk about avoiding escalation and so on. But it's interesting, going back to the 1930s, and by the way, I'm not advocating we join the war in Ukraine. I think what we're currently doing sounds about right to me, in terms of providing weapons and training and so on. But if you go back to the 1930s and look at sort of French and British reluctance to challenge Hitler, one of the reasons was that there was this new concept of strategic bombing. Right. And in the 1930s, there was this sort of, if strategic bombing means that, you will strike fear in the population and they will topple the government, and the war will be over. Right. It's sort of 30 minutes after the first German bombers appear over London. The British people will beg for the British government to stop the war, and so on. And then obviously, then World War II happened, and we know that's not how strategic bombing turned out. But that sort of thinking was, certainly part of sort of, let's not push this to a war because strategic bombing sounds terrible. So maybe if we just give Hitler this, he will be satisfied and we can live another few decades without a war.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hitler, and I don't know what the British or French or American governments or even the Russian government knew about his intent to basically take over the world. I mean, he certainly showed his cards later on in the war. Putin seems to be more regional. But once again, you and I both said we don't know the man, so who really knows?
Yeah. No. And look, it's always hazardous to compare things to Hitler. And again, in this particular case, it was more about sort of the dynamics between countries rather than sort of the man himself. But obviously, the issue here is, and I agree, he is more regional. But obviously, the issue here is countries who he considers to be the Russian near abroad are today U.S. allies. They're EU members, and so on. And the Europeans and the U.S. together, built a European security order where you don't do this kind of stuff, and that is clearly displeasing to Mr. Putin. But yes, so let's put this in perspective. No, I don't think he's bent on world domination, so to speak.
Well, let's certainly hope not, because to your point, he has not brought to bear everything that he has in his country's arsenal.
Right.
And I think everybody's happy that he at least hasn't done anything beyond what he's already done. Indeed. All right, so Magnus, this is something we do with most of our guests. It's a little different. It's meant to be a little more revealing about you as a person. So imagine you are a talk show host for one episode only. It lasts for about an hour. You get to bring 3 guests. One guest female, 1 male, and 1 musical group or soloist. And they can be alive or dead. They can your show can be thought-provoking. It can be entertaining. It can be funny. It can be whatever you want it to be. These can be people that you know, people you don't know, famous, not famous, etc. Who would be on this one-time only talk show that you're hosting?
Wow, that's a great question.
I have to admit, it's not my question originally. It's one of my buddies.
All right. Well, it's like, and it's all, and it's also it's a bit of a stumper, isn't it?
Well, I don't think this is actually going to happen. This talk show is actually not going to happen. So
I don't know. One can always dream, right? Yeah. Interesting. So this would be highly disparate. This show would never sort of hang together. But nevertheless, for the women, Margaret Thatcher would be fun to talk to, and actually, it's one of these things that I've sort of nerded out on, and actually sort of her decision making around the Falkland Islands and then her decision around Falkland, and then actually also sort of whether you agree with it or not, she set her country off in a different direction. And that's just sort of interesting how you sort of affect that kind of political change. So the woman, I think, is Margaret Thatcher. The man is probably George Lucas. Because just like John Watts, I'm a huge Star Wars fan.
Okay.
And I would love, and you probably need to get a couple of beers in him. But I would love to hear what he thinks of all the new stuff that has come out. What he really thinks of it. Music, I'm sort of one of those, like, I'm a casual music guy. Like, I don't listen. So it's funny. I listen to country when I drive, but I could not tell you who I'm listening to. So I'm gonna have to. I'm just like, it's like I like having music in the background. It's not that I sort of run the other way, and I always sort of tune to country radio when I'm out driving because it's just great driving music. But you could hold a gun to my head, and I couldn't, in order to save my life, I couldn't mention, I couldn't mention who I'm actually listening to.
You're probably better off not knowing. But some country musician, that works.
Yeah, but so you can skip the musicians, and we can have a longer conversation with Margaret Thatcher and George Lucas.
Nice. By the way, Margaret Thatcher, my impression of her, and I think she was the prime minister, I'm guessing when I was a kid. She seemed like a brilliant, tough, very thoughtful, and I've used this word a couple of other times, but a lovely person. Like she seemed to have a lot of great qualities that I wish people that I knew possessed.
Yeah, for sure.
Seemed like the total package for a politician for sure.
Yeah, no, and like I said, I mean, it's incredible. You can agree or disagree with the new direction, but the sort of the political change is fundamental. And again, that's just sort of interesting how you get that done. And then you can agree or disagree with that new direction for the country. But just a sort of sheer act, like how do you be right? Because that takes strategy, that takes tactics, that takes sort of sheer force of personality, if you will. And then another one just because sort of closer to sort of my professional life. Because it was not a given thing that Britain was going to go and take back the Falkland Islands, right? But they also turned out to be a strategic miscalculation by Argentina. But at the time, it was not a given that they were going to do that.
All right, I hadn't planned on doing this because I didn't know you were a Star Wars guy. What Star Wars character do you most relate to, and which one is your favorite?
I think my favorite is Han Solo. So he's probably my favorite. I like she was the lead. I just can't remember it. She was the lead character in Rogue One.
I've watched the original 3, and I really didn't follow.
Oh, okay. No, there's a marvelous female lead character in Rogue One. Who it'll come to me. But Han Solo is my favorite. And she also sort of questions conventional wisdom, if you will. Everyone, everyone else says no, this can't be done, and the Death Star is impregnable, and she sort of why don't we go steal the plans and see if we can find a weakness.
So let's end with talking about your family. Is any family members in the U.S. or did everybody stay in Sweden?
Yeah, I'm the only one over here. So I got two parents and an older brother over there. Yeah, so they're all over there. And it's one of those, thank the Lord for modern technology. Unlike the 1800s, it's still relatively easy to keep in touch, right? So I call them a couple. We Zoom and we call, and I send pictures of my kids to them, and so thank God for modern technology. That means that you can sort of stay in touch.
That's awesome. Tell me about your family here in the States.
So I got a wife and 2 kids. So I got a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old. So they're both a boy and a girl. So they're both they're both in sort of interesting ages. So obviously the 10-year-old is growing up quickly, and it's sort of mom and dad aren't cool anymore. It's all about friends and summer camps and so on. But the boy is still in that age, but sort of dad is a superhero, if you will. And then my wife is a teacher out here in Loudoun County, originally from Texas, actually. And her family is half Irish and half Mexican. So I tend to joke. I joke that my wife is hot-blooded and hard drinking. And that's sort of the mix you get when you combine Irish and Mexican.
Wife, what's your wife's name?
Rita.
Rita, and then your son and daughter. What are their names?
So my daughter's name is Kate, and then my son actually has a Swedish Bengt, which is the Swedish version of Benedict.
Okay.
And that was actually my grandfather's name. So we passed on the name to him. So, but I suspect when he gets to first grade, that's quickly going to get converted into a Ben, or something like that.
Is Kate with a K or a C?
With a K.
I'm asking for my friend who's going to do the write up.
Oh God, yeah, it's a K.
Yeah, and then please, I can't pronounce your son's name. Bengt?
Yeah, Bengt. So Bravo, Echo, November, Golf, Tango.
Okay, got it. Okay, that's a very cool name. Maybe he keeps it. You don't know.
Yeah. Maybe. I highly suspect that it's going to turn in. His friends are going to turn it into a Ben before I know it.
Yeah, it's right there. It's the first 3 letters.
Right.
Yeah. And by the way, your 10-year-old thinking mom and dad aren't so cool. It only gets worse. I'm hoping that eventually we'll come back around, but I have a feeling they'll be well into their 20s before that happens. And your 6-year-old loving dad, the way he does, love it while you can.
Oh, yeah. No, lesson learned from my daughter. That's sort of like, oh, this passes.
Hey, so do you have plans to write another book?
We'll see. I may actually want to write. I have a half-cooked plan about actually doing fiction this time around. But it'll probably be a little bit. But it will still be sort of defense and national security related. But it might be fiction instead. I have a half-baked idea. I'll give you a little bit of a hint. I would love to do something that sort of visualizes for the average American what's at stake in great power competition with China. Right? I mean, it's because again, it's easy for Washingtonians to talk about strategy and trade and world order and so on, right? But how do you relate that to sort of the average person, and how if we fail in great power competition against China, how will that impact someone in Ohio? How will that impact life in Chicago or Texas or what have you? And I think one way to do that, to illustrate that might be with fiction. But don't hold your breath. It's not coming anytime soon.
Well, writing a book I've never done it, but I imagine it takes quite an effort and is a grind.
Yeah. No, it is, and certainly, and I certainly didn't go into it sort of I'm going to make a ton of money. Very much a passion project, and because I thought I had a story to tell, but I think I actually did the math and sort of roughly I spent this many thousands of hours on it, and I did the math and and I looked at my royalty checks, and I think I concluded that I would have made way more money if I just got an extra job at McDonald's. But that was not the point. The point was that it was a passion project, and I had a story in my head that needed to get out, if you will.
And I imagine you certainly enjoyed your time putting the book together, certainly more than you would have enjoyed working at McDonald's.
Yeah. No, and it's one of the best things. I'm not going to. It's one of the best things I've one of the best things I've ever done. And one of the unexpected benefits is actually I read differently now, because I sort of I know how a book comes together. So now when I sit down and read a book, I can sort of like, oh, this is the structure, and here's how they here's how the author did this. I didn't think of it, but an unexpected benefit is that I read differently now. And
do you enjoy reading differently now?
Yeah. It makes it a more because you can sort of follow the author's logic or what he or she is trying to do, and it's like, oh, I get it. This is how he or she built this or structured it this way. So yes, I enjoy it more.
Your next book that may take a while to put together, I love the idea. Telling a story that is technically fiction but has some real world value, and especially that topic and making it real for the average American, I think is time well spent.
Yeah.
I wish you the best putting that together.
Thanks. That's the plan. But like I said, don't hold your breath. It'll be a bit.
Well, Magnus, it's great talking to you, man. I hope you enjoyed this experience. I really appreciate the book you wrote. I think I read it literally. I've flown a couple different places, and I read it over those 2 trips. It was it was a good read.
All right, great. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, and wish you nothing but the best.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it. Let's stay in touch.
Okay, absolutely.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.